But despite my best efforts, perhaps the DA is not the best vehicle which is suited to take forward the vision of building one South Africa. And therefore it is with great sadness that in order to continue this fight for the vision I strongly believe and the country I so dearly love, I will today step down as leader of the DA.
The continuation of that conversation. Good evening and welcome to Unfiltered on SABC 3 and SABC News Channel 404. I'm Desiree Chauke. Now, political events of the past week have once again brought to the fore how South Africans are divided around racial lines. Be it politics, sports, South Africans are battling to unite against their differences in colour. The return of former DA leader Helen Zille to the party as its new federal chair subsequently resulted in the resignations of its party leader Mmusi Maimane, Joburg Mayor Herman Mashaba, as well as Athol Trollip. To many black people, this signaled a purge of black leaders from a party mostly seen as the guardian of white privilege at the expense of the majority of black voters. Now we're asking you tonight, can South Africa rise above politics of race and racial identity? That's our question tonight on Unfiltered. And to help us unpack it, we're joined in the studio by Angelo Fick. He's the Director of Research at Auwal Socio-Economic Research Institute. Welcome to you and thanks for coming through. We also have political analyst Prince Mashele. Prince, thank you so much for coming through. We also have on the line political journalist and writer Joubert. He joins us on the line from Cape Town. To all three of you, welcome to the show. Angelo, perhaps let me start with you. The history of politics in South Africa has understandably been racial. 25 years down the line for democracy. Is there a place for this discussion in contemporary South African politics?
I think there is a very important place to be, a very important discussion to be had, because it's not just politics that continues to be haunted by the spectre of race. The politics that we have has to deal with the ordinary and everyday lives of people a quarter of a century after the official abolition of legislated white supremacy. But we did not necessarily institute a specific anti-racist and denazification program, and so it's no surprise that race continues and racism continues to haunt not just politics but the social fabric, the institutions, the rituals, the habits of thought and being of millions of South Africans. In order for that not to happen, you have to do very hard work. We haven't done that work for 25 years, and the question is, are we committed to doing such work now that we are here?
We'll talk about other parties later, but Prince, there was a time seemingly in the Democratic Alliance when it seemed like they were turning the corner. Even in her book, Helen, where she in Without a Fight, she talks about they were trying to reach out to people such as yourselves to reach out to black sentiment. But you wrote an article this week where you say Zille, a stubborn woman who shows the middle finger to black people, and you're saying what has happened to the DA is a step towards our ugly past. What do you mean?
Well, the DA had undertaken a bold social experiment, and it was actually led by Helen Zille herself. Let's remember that when the DA was formed, it was actually formed by white political parties that came together. And that original founding meeting, there were no black people there. It was a white agenda.
You say black people were only tea ladies?
Yeah, of course. I mean, you can't imagine that people who made coffee, they were white. I mean, we know the South African reality that white people don't make coffee. It's black people who make coffee for white people. So as the party progressed, they realized, the DA, that in the changed political environment of South Africa, it would be politically unpalatable to have a party that is purely white. That's when they took a decision to invite black people. But that strategy was well managed. It was not like opening up the entire party. It was to select a few black people, and the intention was to control those few black people who were invited into the party. But the people who continued to hold the power strings were actually white. So down the road, when Zille stepped aside, she left the party in the hands of Mmusi Maimane.
Yep.
But she continued to watch the party. And then now she took a decision that the party was actually in wrong hands. They cooked up a scheme with the Institute of Race Relations that they now want to take back the party. If you look at the people who worked on that strategy, they are all white.
So even after that entire effort of bringing in black supposed leadership and interacting with these people, the supposed people in the background, your Tony Leon and the other authors of that report, the DA report, were not convinced that black people can be in leadership in politics.
Well, they continue to watch developments in their party, and they knew that they were actually the true guardians and the directors of the party, which is why when the moment came, when they felt that they had actually lost control and that white people were now leaving the DA and going to the Freedom Front, they felt the need to take back the party. So if you look, for example, at the committee that drafted that review, these are 3 white males. I mean, in South Africa, you are reviewing the performance of the DA, which supposedly is inclusive. You only have 3 white males, no black person there. And you say that South Africans must not see through the whole strategy, that it is a coordinated strategy by white people to get rid of black leaders. It is very clear.
Yan, let's bring you in here. When you wrote that book, Who Will Rule in 2019, just before the elections, did you ever fathom in your wildest imagination that Helen Zille would be back in politics?
No, it was surprising. Look, the moment she threw her name into the hat, I thought she would win. But I was very surprised that she didn't just decide to let someone else take a chance and lead the party. I do want to say, though, to the previous input, that it is so that those 3 people who wrote that report were handpicked by Mmusi Maimane himself. So the choice was not theirs. The choice was that of Mr. Maimane. It was he who decided that it would be Mgileru, Tony Leon and Ryan Kutsia who would write the report, and no one else. He acted of his own volition. And a strange choice, I thought, because it was an unrepresentative sample, but very much so that the actions came from the leader himself and not from anyone else. You can hardly blame the panel for reaching a discussion if they did not appoint themselves. It was he.
Has it been verified? Do we know any backstory about whether Mmusi really did encourage the commissioning of this report? Because it's scathing against him. Angelo?
Well, the official version, as Yan just pointed out, is that he commissioned the report and investigation and appointed the panel.
The report starts off by thanking him for
yes,
leading
and
this process.
One can understand at one level why Mmusi Maimane would imagine these 3 people are the appropriate people, but it's also bad politics. So if one goes back into the late 20th century, the Ugandan scholar Mahmoud Mamdani, talking about the University of Cape Town, spoke about how you have a braai circle. In other words, you come to the meeting and the decision has been made before you got to the meeting, and so the meeting is stacked. And so if Mmusi Maimane really honestly appointed these people, he obviously had no idea what dynamics were going on inside the party that he was leading, and was blind to the maneuvers that were being, sort of...
Does that put paid to the assertions they make about him in the report?
Well, the assertions, I think, are not necessarily the kinds of conclusions I would have reached coming from looking at the same kinds of evidence. But my concern with that panel is not necessarily that they're all 3 white men. My concern with the panel is that the way in which the report is written speaks of a politics founded in 1970s white liberalism, which had been interrogated by white South Africans like Nadine Gordimer, J.M. Coetzee, and various other people for its inability to adjust to the very realities of late 20th century South Africa. Its applicability, that political view that they have, that blackness is somehow diversity, that they want to talk about minorities. The very language is the language of the PFP, of Helen Suzman. It is not the language that we have engendered since that period through the UDF, through post-apartheid South Africa. That's the language that they seem incapable of addressing themselves to the world through. And that speaks to me of people who are stuck in a historical moment.
Different parties have had different responses, and the ANC's Mr. Wule says ANC remains the only non-racial home for all South Africans. I'd just like you to think about that. We're going to take a quick break. You're watching Unfiltered, and we're asking you if South Africa can find itself out of the conversations about race-based politics, and we'll look at your responses when we return from this break.
Nervous. It's okay to be nervous on your first day, but you'll make lots of friends, and I'll be here when you get back. With Auwal Life Insurance, I provide for my family.
Get 1 million rand cover from just 189 rand per month with Auwal Life Insurance. For a quote, SMS Live to 48853.
On Economics Unbound, we unpack everything from corruption.
On the day he resigned, he was not aware of any fraud. Of course, they called it accounting irregularities. We've always called it fraud.
To the effects global activities have on different economies around the world.
This drone attack seems to be the single worst sudden disruption ever in the world oil market. But what does all of this mean for South Africa and the rest of the world?
The last thing we need is a spike in oil prices and a disruption in oil supply. We will have a repeat of the recession of the 70s, which is really very dire for the global economy.
Join Tandeka and Nana on Economics Unbound, Thursdays at 9 p.m.
My name is Sergeant Major Conaway. I choose yellow as a sign that I'm feeling opportunistic towards South Africa.
My name is Kasaundorana, and I'm from Ethiopia, Addis Ababa. I came to South Africa in 2001. We're going to give the political landscape and system of South Africa green, because we are still the best in the continent.
Out of these three, I choose red. Our government is under danger. Corruption, unemployment, youth unemployment, water crisis. We are in trouble.
Our job as the SA Today team doesn't simply start when cameras start to roll. We also work tirelessly behind the scenes to keep you up to date with stories of the day.
What have you established as an organization, or rather as an association, regarding this WhatsApp group Stokvel?
If you look at the WhatsApp Stokvels, people join irrespective of whether they know each other or not. So the person joining is faceless. The one recruiting is also faceless. It's a disaster.
Watch SA Today every day from 3 p.m.
The SABC News mobile app is your one-stop digital portal to all the news you need. Stay connected with the latest in breaking news. Watch the SABC News channel along with clips and live streams of all the big news events. And listen to all the SABC News radio stations live, including podcasts and much more. Simply download the SABC News app to your Android or iOS device from either the Play Store or the App Store. SABC News, independent, impartial.
I cannot be a willing participant in good conscience in a process that is placing the narrow internal interest of a political party ahead of the needs of the 5 million residents of our city, of the city of Johannesburg.
You are a hero. You are a hero to me. You are a hero to me. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Welcome back. You're watching Unfiltered, and of course our conversation is based on events around the Democratic Alliance in the past week, where we're looking at the broader political landscape in South Africa and asking if race-based politics will become a thing of the past one day. Let's take a look at your social media comments. Mahatebe saying, as long as race-based problems are dealt with in an apologetic manner, excuses made will never overcome racism. Mashuka saying we should start looking at people as individuals, not colors. Ideally, isn't it? Zaki Matebula saying it can't, as our parliament is too much apologetic to what they see as very wrong. I never had in Zimbabwe them crying about racism, even in Swatini, even in Mozambique. Why us in South Africa? Is it because our ANC government is very apologetic to what they see as a problem? All right, we have a last one, African Viking saying, only if the racist politicians are removed every time they spew racist hate. And we'll look at that later on about whether politicians take advantage of the situation or not. But legend has it that the conversation about the removal of Mmusi Maimane from the leadership of the Democratic Alliance started way back on the results ground at the IEC Results Center in Pretoria, when it was starting to show that the DA was not going to be doing very well in the May elections. And Prince, you're saying that you don't believe that he commissioned the report?
No, I don't believe it, because I know that there was a faction in the DA that got into overdrive immediately after the elections when they saw the results, and they started working underground to remove Mmusi Maimane. The Institute of Race Relations has been at the center of that project, including Helen Zille herself. So when they went to that Federal Council meeting to assess the results, they went there with a two-pronged strategy. Strategy number one, we must push for his removal. And there was a backlash, by the way, in that meeting by black leaders. Herman Mashaba led the charge. So if you were to see the recordings of that meeting, South Africans would be shocked. When they realized that there was a backlash from black leaders, they then activated the second prong, which is a proposal to appoint a panel review. If you look at the selection of those specific panel members, that is very interesting.
Tony Leon, Ryan
a former leader of the DA, Tony Leon, an agent, the leader of the so-called Fight Back project of the DA. Must not forget that. Ryan Kutse is the former strategist of the DA who worked with both Tony Leon as well as with Helen Zille. It cannot be an accident that that ring finds itself being appointed to review the party. So South Africans must not be fooled. There was a strategy, the so-called Mmusi Maimane, that this whole propaganda that Mmusi Maimane appointed that panel, it's, in my view, it's nonsense, because I know it didn't happen that way.
Yan, let's bring you back
in. Come in there?
Absolutely.
Prince, if that is so, who appointed it then? And I mean, let us move into the matter of fact. You seem very, very clear on this, and this is news to me, so I always enjoy hearing new things. Who, according to you, appointed this panel, if it wasn't Mr. Maimane?
Yan, you're taking over my job.
Sorry. I'm just fascinated, because
it's okay.
This is news as it happened.
We can have the conversation, but what I want to know from you is what good can come out of Helen Zille coming back?
We'll have to see. You know, everybody builds their own future. As I said, I was very, very surprised by her comeback. Didn't see it coming. Whether it's a good or a bad thing, time will tell. You know, in this country, if you don't learn two things, you've learned nothing from our history. The first is empathy, and the second is that it's never too late. So who knows whether there will be any good coming from it. At this stage, it's led to 3 resignations, and we'll have to see whether that's a good or a bad thing. It doesn't look so good for the DA at the moment. Let's see what the future brings.
Angelo, Julius Malema was in Nazareth this afternoon, where they went for a site visit in preparation for their conference in December. And one of the things he said was the ANC must be celebrating at the unfolding of events at the Democratic Alliance. And Bulemabi saying that the ANC now remains the only non-racial home for all South Africans. Should the African National Congress be celebrating at these developments?
Well, they may very well celebrate, because in the next election they're likely, if the DA continues to weaken and does not strengthen itself over the next 6 years before that 5 years before that general election, the ANC is likely to be the major beneficiary because of simply a turnout and quotient and proportion of voters. What I think we also need to remind ourselves is that the ANC itself, if we take Mashaba at his word, is also still stuck in the 20th century. Our political parties have yet to distinguish clearly and distinctly between non-racialism, this 1950s concept that has really, science has moved on, and anti-racism. And this conflation in that report, for example, between anti-racism and non-racialism speaks to the really muffled and muddled politics of the report writers and of the DA. I don't agree that the DA's problems began with the election results. The DA's problems began much earlier around the contestation over the leader's position on questions of racism, questions of broad-based economic empowerment, questions of affirmative action. It then got exacerbated around the Diane Kohler-Barnard situation and the disciplinary procedures applied there. It then got much worse around Helen Zille's position and Mmusi Maimane showing his weakness and people inside his party actually contradicting him. You then go into late 2018 and there is open disarray around policy questions. You then go before the elections, and 8 weeks before the elections, Gwen Ngwenya, their policy wonk, resigns. And she resigns in a public letter in which she all but impugns Mmusi Maimane as the leader.
A lot of speculation she could be coming back?
Well, you know, she's probably coming back. My concern is that the DA has dealt with this problem that it has identified as race in a very curious way. Let's go back to 2014. Helen Zille appoints a black woman. I'm going to ask you to hold on to your thoughts there. You know we are time controlled in live shows, but let's take a break. We'll be back and talking to Angelo Fick, Prince Mashele and Joubert. Stay with us.
This is where we take a look inside the world of media, analysing the trends, the issues and the reporting of some of the week's top stories.
One of the things that we are seeing across the globe, people are consuming news and living their lives with their mobile devices.
The evolution of journalism is to use the same skills, the same ethics, the same values, but to cater to different audiences because it's not the same people.
There is a lot of debate in this industry today whether the future is about digital paid content. Will there be a market for users to pay for digital content? And we see that in Africa it's a challenge.
People will go, pay for a newspaper, take it away. Why won't they pay it for it online?
In the initial stages of shifting from print to online, we created the impression that what people were paying for was the paper. And so people are very reluctant to pay for the journalism, and good journalism is very expensive.
Watch Media Monitor Sundays at 9 a.m.
On Health Talk, we discuss everything from the common cold to illnesses you may not have heard of.
Fibroids are benign tumors. What that means is that they're not cancerous.
We're talking STIs, and clearly there's a lot of people out there who know, but I'm sure there's some who still don't.
We're talking about sexually transmitted infections. So these are infections transmitted between two partners engaging in sexual activity.
I developed vitiligo at the ages of 5. As we went to dermatologists, they are the ones which told us that this condition is actually vitiligo.
After consuming a lot of mixtures, putting a lot of ointments, I just said it's enough.
When we deal with employee wellness, it's necessarily all of those things that, if are not attended to, will affect the company's bottom line in terms of productivity.
Watch Health Talk Saturday at 9 a.m.
I sincerely hope that what the party will do is to turn its back on the slavish race-based obsession of the last few years, because it has led the party into a situation where we've actually lost votes across all communities, white and black, have turned away from the DA.
Oh, it's the new DA parliamentary leader, Mr. Steen Hazen, but we'll talk about him later. Let's just finish off on that point that you were making before we went to break.
It's simple and connects with what Mr. Steen Hazen has to say. I think there's a conflation of correlation and causation in South Africa, and I think political parties, political commentators, ordinary members of the public often assume that the facile view of race, that it's colour, that it is something that you can talk about in 30-second bites, is the way to go, is part of the problem that we have here. That there is no substantial engagement with the topic by politicians, by public commentators, by the public, and so we continue to have the same wheel turn on us, crush us, and then we're surprised. So my concern in this debate is that the DA has its problem, but so does the rest of South Africa with this question of race and its related problem, racism.
Prince, Yan wants to know why you asserting that Mmusi Maimane didn't commission that report. As journalists, we don't give out our sources. I don't know if you want to give out yours.
Yeah, I won't give out my sources, but I can assure Yan that I did speak to people who have been in the meetings, so I know what I'm talking about. But officially, that's the word of the party that Mmusi Maimane appointed that review panel. Here is the other thing about it. That review panel approached Mmusi Maimane, the three chaps,
asking him to leave.
Ask him to resign. Who mandated them to go and ask the party leader to resign? That's the question.
So what I want to ask you now is, were they surprised that they got their gift so early? Christmas came early for them.
You mean who?
The writers of the report.
No, they were not surprised.
Because the turnout of events is exactly what they suggested in the report that should be done.
Remember, they knew that they were cooking up a scheme to get rid of Mmusi Maimane. That if they produce a report that says he must go, they will then submit it and process it through party structures. And that report would strengthen the call for Mmusi to go. So they actually sat behind the scenes and watched the whole thing unfold as they planned it.
So Herman Mashaba resigns, and he reckons there's still a future for coalition politics in South Africa. What will be the role of the economic freedom fighters in the choosing of a new executive mayor for the city of Johannesburg, for argument's sake?
Presumably that's a question that the economic freedom fighters are best placed to answer, but I think if coalition politics is to survive beyond this marriage of inconvenience that we've just seen unravelling before us, it has to be based on principles that are traded on which issues are going to be tackled, and we didn't see that, and so it does not surprise me. Herman Mashaba did not speak in the voice of the DA. Herman Mashaba did not speak as a liberal at any point in his role as mayor, and let's not forget that when he was appointed, the EFF was very unhappy with his appointment. They went as far as to publicly say they can work with Solium Samanga, but part of their concerns with Johannesburg was the man that the DA had chosen. So we often have this amnesia in South African politics. Often the agents of politics themselves have that amnesia. So this idea that Herman Mashaba is the hero is an ironic twist for me.
Yan, what are your thoughts about the EFF's role?
About the EFF's role, I think that for the EFF, they are caught between the devil and the deep blue sea, if you would pardon the expression. They are in the position of third largest parties worldwide, where they have to act as kingmaker and, as Angelo put it, in a marriage of inconvenience. So for the EFF, the question is for them to grow, which is their point. Who do they work with? And the pond in which they fish is not the DA pond. The pond in which they fish is the ANC pond. So
that green monster calls time once again. Yan, I'm going to have to ask you to hold on to your thoughts and say goodbye to our SABC3 viewers. If you're interested in continuing to interact with us in this conversation, switch on to SABC channel 404 on DSTV on the other side of the hour. Stay with us.
And I realized that this weekend that it was probably my time to go. And I'm happy to accept that. I'm happy to move on and try and build or rebuild my life. Not easy for somebody with my complexion at my age and my hairstyle. But I'm prepared to do that.
What happened today came as a shock to members of the Federal Executive that met today to implement or discuss the implementation of the resolutions of the Federal Council.
Of course, the backdrop is the Democratic Alliance developments, but we're asking you today, are South African politics still a racial minefield? We asked you to interact with us on this, and Zola Kwangwevenja says this question contains a fallacy of hasty generalizations. For race politics is not a problem of South Africa, but a particular race which enjoyed the privilege of superiority, then continues to enjoy it and still want to hold on to it to the end. So because you don't want to offend that whiteness, you make us all guilty of the crime of a particular race. Quite meaty, that one. The race, Bas Makam saying the race issue is an unending war. Just look at the oil-rich countries hoping to end terrorism. It's just like a daydream. Andy Lesam, not all, as long as certain race see themselves as superior people than blacks, we will never unite. And a final comment from Twitter there, Vugani Kumalo, saying, as long as we still live through the legacy of apartheid, it's always going to be difficult to rise above race-based politics. Do the political parties in South Africa take advantage of this sometimes, Prince?
They do. I mean, the ANC, for example, despite what it says, actually sees itself in the main as a black party. And you must look at the way they structure and design their campaigns during elections. You can see that quite clearly they're targeting black voters. So they do take advantage of race. The DA is in a tailspin as we speak because the white wire pullers of the DA are worried that the DA has lost a segment of white voters to the Freedom Front. So political parties... They state so in their report. Yeah, exactly. So political parties do actually take race very seriously. But here is the thing about it. The race question problem in South Africa is not something that was created by these political parties. It is the reality of South Africa. The question is, how do political parties respond to the reality? That's where race enters the discourse of intra-party politics.
How do we separate responding and abusing the reality of the South African political landscape, Angelo?
We do that by actually learning from history, and not just from the history of the events that we imagine, but the history of the science and scientific investigation of race. So we know that race has no veridic reality, it has no status, and we've known this since the 40s. It is something that isn't real but has real consequences, and so we've known since the 1980s the work of Robert Miles, who talks about how we don't look at the world using the lens of race, we look at how people use race to make sense of the world, and that's a distinction. If you're doing anti-racist work, you're trying to undo the work of racism, and so you look at how people are using race to make sense of the world. You then try and give them better tools to make sense of the world by indicating to them that race is the skein under which all sorts of other differences of potential political similarities and parities are being masked. We also look to the work of somebody like Steve Biko and the Black Consciousness movement. In South Africa in the 90s, we deliberately turned away from that and embraced this non-racialism of the ANC from the 50s. We did not embrace what had happened in the UDF through and from that back to the 70s out of the Black Consciousness movement, which was to think through race to get beyond race and to undo racism. So what we hear now from politicians is, somebody like Athol Trollip who thinks race is about complexion.
Yeah.
That's like suggesting that TB is about coughing.
That was so simplistic.
It thinks that TB is coughing, and everybody who thinks they have a lung think that they can be a lung specialist. Nobody has to study this stuff, nobody has to think carefully about it, nobody has to investigate the philosophical bases of this.
Yeah.
And so when we say that there's a race problem, we've identified race as the problem, not the rhetoric around the use of race, which is actually the problem, because people are using race productively to get what they want, as opposed to using it to undo the work of racism and get to a place where race will have no value and status in determining people's lives. And that's a project that I don't think any party in this country in this moment is actually invested in.
Yan, the new DA parliamentary leader, John Steenhuisen, says anybody who thinks race is not an issue in South Africa is naive. What should we take from this seeming leader who's now coming into the leadership fold within the Democratic Alliance?
Well, I think I fully agree with Angelo's analysis, in full. So I think that points to the fact that surely on this specific issue, much as he would prefer it not to be the case, Steenhuisen is correct that anyone who thinks that race isn't an issue couldn't have been watching this program. Of course it's an issue, that's why we're having an hour-long discussion about it. The question, as Angelo put it quite correctly, and as Prince has said, is how do we rise above it? Where do we get the concept of whiteness versus being white? These are two different concepts. Whiteness is a way of looking at life. It is not specifically racially bound. And how do we rise above it so that we become one nation?
Here's the thing about, you see, it really makes no difference that someone is white and someone is black. We're all human. We know that. So if you analyze me as a black person biologically, there's nothing different really between me and Yan. But here is how race becomes an issue. It is because people distribute resources on the basis of race. So they use race to distribute resources. That's where it becomes an issue. So for example, if you were to travel across South Africa, you go to a restaurant in the Western Cape, this is what you will find. You'll find white people sitting there enjoying food served by black people, right? But of course, biologically, the people who are serving these white people are the same as those who are receiving the service. The question is, how did we get to a position where whites are served by blacks? So if you look at the South African reality, that is the reality. That is the question of the construction of power to benefit a specific race. So if you want to deconstruct it, you are not going to deconstruct it by saying, let us talk about it or let us not talk about it. You must deconstruct it by redesigning the way you distribute resources so that people are equal. So it shouldn't be black people serving whites.
So Angelo, does that then mean that the African National Congress has failed in using its political power in the past 25 years?
It has failed to do the work necessary to get us to a point where this is not a question we have to ask a quarter of a century after we've abolished white supremacy on the legislation front. What we did not do in this country was complete the project by moving beyond the legislative abolition towards the social building. And that's not about social cohesion. It's about what one thinks of as social solidarity, to help people through the education system, through the institutions in which race is remade endlessly, because race as it is articulated in 2019 is not the same as it was articulated 50 years ago. People who still use that report prepared by the DA still uses the Population Registration Act categories. My question is, people will not have, there are people born today who can vote, who have not been defined by that legislation which was abolished in 1994. If you insist on defining people in those terms, you are stuck in a particular mindset, view of the world, understanding. The rest of world history, the rest of scientific development, the rest of philosophical thinking has clearly not happened for these people. And the African National Congress is in a similar boat. It continues to conflate non-racialism with anti-racism. It continues to think it can undo racism simply by attacking individual incidents of racism.
Will the
structures have to change.
Will the efforts such as the President's speech yesterday in his capacity as the President of the African National Congress, the efforts to remember things such as the Morogoro Conference, will they help in kind of reviving ideology and that kind of thinking within the party?
It may do that inside the party, but if the rest of South Africa's unified national public education system continues to teach the absolute rubbish on questions of race, identity, belonging and sophistication that it does, you are not going to have 58 million people think of themselves other than the way they do. This is the equivalent of teaching phlogiston to people instead of chemistry and assuming you can get very good doctors out of the system. This idea that scientific knowledge engendered, which Helen Zille dismisses, over the last 100 years on race and racism.
She continues to dismiss it on social media.
So the question is, what are you going to engender if you are practicing this irrational, non-rational, anti-scientific thinking, and it is part of the everyday curriculum, everyday way of living that people have experienced and are interpolated through ideologically? You have to change the institutions, and that means that people in these institutions have to change the language in which they speak about race and speak against racism.
On Unfiltered tonight, we are asking you about race-based politics in South Africa. Let's take a break. We'll be back in a moment. Stay with us.
Highly affordable, innovative car insurance for all South Africans. Only from PMD. We offer fixed premiums. And there's a product to suit every budget. Simply choose your cover. Starting from just 165 Rand per month, Third Party Plus offers R500,000 third-party vehicle liability protection and includes growing cover for your vehicle. Or from just 495 Rand per month, you can customize your cover to enjoy benefits like 100% market value cover when you write off your car in an accident, or lose it through theft, hijacking or natural disaster. Or from just 635 Rand per month, PMD's comprehensive policy gives you great benefits with an excess that reduces to zero over time. And add optional credit protection features to help settle your outstanding debt with your bank after a loss. With PMD, you enjoy fixed premiums. And PMD has a plan and price for you. Change the way you think about insurance. Change to PMD. SMS MOTOR to 43814 and we'll call you. That's MOTOR to 43814. PMD, fixed premiums.
Go wonder in the new Ford EcoSport Ambiente with great features like 6 speakers and a full-size spare wheel. From only 3,499 per month with an 8% interest rate. Offer valid over 48 months, financed on Ford options through Ford Credit, an authorized FSP and registered credit provider.
That as South Africans, as all these political parties, whatever our differences, that we do indeed need to respond to the challenges that we have identified in the country in common. The DA quite correctly says it's an opposition party, therefore it must discharge its responsibilities in that regard. That's very correct. But it's also a South African party. I'm sure committed to helping, working with everybody to ensure that we solve the problems that we face, whether it's of unemployment or crime or persisting racism or sexism and so on. And I'm quite sure that in addition to what it says about itself as an opposition party correctly, the DA would also say it has a role to play in building this new South Africa.
The former President Thabo Mbeki also threw in his lot about developments at the Democratic Alliance in this conversation we're having today about race-based politics in South Africa. Yanyan, let me bring you back in here. In announcing his intention to leave the Democratic Alliance, Mmusi Maimane mentioned how he was hounded by Afrikaans publications, some of which you have previously worked for. Give us a window into the machinations at these publications. Are they trying to fuel race-based politics in South Africa?
I should hope not. Look, an organization or a publication is not a being of itself. You know, it is a publication is governed by the people who work there at the given time, and especially by the editor. What he is referring to is the fact that Rapport newspaper, the Sunday paper, published the worry that there was with some people in the Democratic Alliance that Mr. Maimane was underpaying for the house that he lives in Claremont, Cape Town. And the publication chose to publish a picture of the house which Mr. Maimane says placed his family's safety in jeopardy. So that's what he was referring to. Whether or not that is correct or not depends on your view. I do not work at an Afrikaans publication at the moment, not so far as a newspaper is concerned. So I don't really know what the discussion was, and I wouldn't want to assume or presume what the discussion was.
Let's talk about the future. One of the parties that was said to have benefited from the demise of the Democratic Alliance in the May elections was the Freedom Front Plus. The people who moved over to the Freedom Front Plus, do they feel vindicated right now?
I'm not sure there's any vindication. I think people shifted their politics based on their inability or ability to read what the DA's policy was or was not. This idea that people are irrational and simply vote on race-based grounds is, not borne out by the evidence. The people who moved their vote because they rationally believed that the Freedom Front Plus met their political ideas and desires better than the DA was promising to do or had done if they were loyal voters. The shift in voting patterns cannot just easily be reduced to race. Race plays a role, but the way those people moved their votes was also the DA, as that report indicates. As that report indicates.
Do you agree, Prince?
Policy sort of instability and inability to articulate that policy clearly is part of the problem of the DA.
These people didn't move because of race-based
politics.
Well,
I don't agree with it. You see, by the way, it's not only there are two political parties in South Africa that have benefited the most from the last elections. And we focus mainly on one, which is the Freedom Front. And it's wrong to do so. The EFF has grown in this election. And the people who have voted for the EFF are black. No white people voted for the EFF. The people who have voted for the Freedom Front, who ditched the DA, are white. Now, you can't tell me that you can't see race in those patterns. Now, here is the thing about it. White people, in the main, have viewed the DA as a political vehicle that protects and advances their interests. The moment the DA seems to prevaricate around that issue or seems to depart from that agenda, then you are offending white voters. That's why when they shift, they don't go to the EFF or the ANC, they go to the Freedom Front. Just like black people are offended in the ANC when they think that the ANC is no longer a vehicle that protects their interests, they don't shift to the Freedom Front, they shift to the EFF. So race does explain voter behavior in South Africa.
So let's hold a little bit of a crystal ball and look into the future. 2021, those local government elections. 2016, the DA had an amazing time at the polls. Will we see a repeat of that, Angelo?
My crystal ball is very cloudy. I never do predictive analysis. I only analyze on what has happened and based on research. I don't speculate why people vote the way they do. I listen to what people tell me about what they voted and where that comes from. So as for what will happen in 2021, I will wait until 2021 to see what South Africans do at the polls.
Of course, Helen Zille will be working very hard. You say in your article that this is the return of a diabolical leader, a diabolical face to her organization and society. And you're also saying, let's not forget, when the original DA was formed, there was no black person in the room. What will Helen Zille be doing from now going into 2021 to make sure that she recaptures the imagination of voters?
The point I make in that article is this. The statement is that a diabolical leader lends a diabolical face to his or her organization or society. And I use the example of Verwoerd, who was a diabolical leader who became a diabolical face of apartheid. And then I come to Helen Zille to say that she has availed herself as a spokesperson of colonialism of late.
You also say history manifests through personality.
Exactly. So the attitude of South Africans, especially black South Africans, is that she is actually a face and a representative of colonialism. So if I take that as an observation and try to project, my prediction is that less and less black people will vote for the DA going forward. More and more, maybe they would manage to get the white people who went to the Freedom Front, but black people will not vote for the DA in the way that they were beginning to think that maybe the DA is a possibility going into the future.
You're watching Unfiltered. We're talking about race-based politics in South Africa. We will look at some of your comments coming back from this break.
Nervous. It's okay to be nervous on your first day, but you'll make lots of friends, and I'll be here when you get back. With Auwal Life Insurance, I provide for my family.
Get 1 million rand cover from just 189 rand per month with Auwal Life Insurance. For a quote, SMS live to 48853.
The SABC News mobile app is your one-stop digital portal to all the news you need. Stay connected with the latest in breaking news, Watch the SABC News channel along with clips and live streams of all the big news events. And listen to all the SABC News radio stations live, including podcasts and much more. Simply download the SABC News app to your Android or iOS device from either the Play Store or the App Store. SABC News, independent, impartial.
Welcome back. You're watching Unfiltered, and we continue with that conversation, looking at a quote from former DA Federal Chairperson Douglas Gibson saying, "So any party that wants to rely on a minority like the whites for its support is doomed to get smaller and smaller, so it would be stupid to do anything other than seek to represent the whole of South Africa." Yan, I don't know if you heard that. Is this in line with what the DA wants to achieve, not necessarily be the governing party in South Africa, but retain its influence?
I think that's what all parties want to achieve. All parties want to grow. And obviously, if you're sitting in a situation where 8% of the population is white, it would be silly, especially if you have 21% support, which means that the majority of your supporters would not be white. That's just a mathematical sum. To just go for the white vote. Obviously, everybody will go for every vote they can get. And that is why I think that I agree with Angelo that it is not that clear to see what the 2021 results will be. I think it would be tough for the DA to repeat its 2016 performance, but the point is that it is also a local government election, which means that those areas which are, especially outside of the Western, Eastern, Northern Cape, are basically multiracial, middle-class areas. They will also vote for the councillor, and if the DA councillor is good, that might help the DA. If the DA councillor is not good, then that would have an impact on its performance.
Angela, I know you say you don't like forecasting. Is it foolhardy to take it for granted that the African National Congress will retain the metros that were taken from them, or is the EFF watching them?
I think unless there is a radical shift in the way in which the ANC governs, because we tend to focus on the ANC's failures, there are some successes. It is unlikely that there will be the kind of radical shift that we saw, given the DA's internal dynamics, given the now opposition that's clear between the EFF and the DA on the basis of what has just happened, and the smaller parties are not able to make that up. But I think what we need to bear in mind is that political actors, voters, do not only vote inside of the Population Registration Act categories of 1950. They vote in a varieties of ways based on their interests, based on what they identify. Otherwise, no black person in South Africa, and I mean none, will have supported the Democratic Party or the Democratic Alliance or the New National Party. And yet, the numbers exist. You can go into places where no white people live, and people in those wards voted for those parties.
Yeah.
So the question is, what is it that people are using? And parties continue to use race when they could also use other aspects of people's lives.
So a question now that I'll ask all of you: what will John Steenhuisen do for the Democratic Alliance in Parliament, 1, and 2, who will be the new leader of the Democratic Alliance?
Well, I wish I knew who would be the new leader of the Democratic Alliance. I don't know, to be honest. What will he do for and to the party in Parliament? I think he's going to reassure white voters that the party is back in white hands. And that is a strategy that those whites who have left the DA to vote for the Freedom Front, they must come back when they see that the party is actually led by one of their own.
Angelo?
I think what he's also going to do is galvanize the conservative elements inside the Democratic Alliance who have felt that under Mmusi Maimane the role of race has been far too large in the party, and the dithering on questions of affirmative action and broad-based black economic empowerment will be clarified. And increasingly those people in the party, because the report says this, who do not think of the individual as primary, will find themselves alienated and possibly pushed out.
Yan, John Steenhuisen, how he will take the DA forward in Parliament?
I agree that what you will not have is a lot of uncertainty. He's a very he's got a lot of certitude. What exactly the direction will be that he will take is unclear at the moment. I think he made a very long speech at the Cape Town Press Club, which I attended today, which basically said that it would be non-racialism, that it would be compassion, that it would be enterprise economics, and that it would be reconciliation, which he would focus on. We'd see how that ideal plays out. And as for the next leader of the DA, I think anyone who wants to beat Steer Nason on the 17th of November for the interim leader, or in April for the federal leader, would have his work cut out, or her work cut out.
And the future for Mmusi?
Well, I just cannot imagine Mmusi sitting under a tree, pining away somewhere. My sense is that, and he did say that he is still going to work on the agenda for One South Africa for All. My prediction is that we will see Mmusi in politics, either through a new political party or some kind of a political vehicle.
What conversations do you think are taking place in the background, especially with parties like the EFF?
Between the DA and the EFF?
Mmusi and the EFF, or Mmusi and the African National Congress, for interest sake.
I don't think there are conversations about membership.
Yeah.
If there are, both of those parties will be painfully stabbing themselves and alienating all sorts of people, given that Mmusi Maimane has particular politics and has a particular political record. He's in the same position as Mampili Rampili was in the wake of the Ahang SA disaster. This is not a man that a political party wants to take on board if they have an eye to not alienating people.
And as we finish our conversation, I want to ask quickly, is a conversation about Godrich Gadi in the EFF a racial conversation? The conversation that he might not come back as a leader?
No, it can't be a racial conversation. I mean,
Julius Malema has used it several times to say we have Indian people in our party.
Well, Julius Malema and Floyd Shivambu, the two, are actually black racists, and they have in the past, by the way, articulated anti-Indian and anti-white ideas. Yeah, they have publicly. I mean, I'm not manufacturing this thing. They've attacked Indians, they've attacked whites, they've called for the cutting of the throat of whiteness. But Godrich Gadi is not, as far as I'm aware, is not Indian. He's actually a mixed race personality. His father is black. Okay, I'm going to have to thank all our guests for coming through tonight. And we were asking you, can South Africans rise above race-based politics? And 19% of you say yes, 15% say maybe, and a whopping 67% say no chance. Thank you so much to Angelo Fick, Director of Research at Auwal Socio-Economic Research Institute, and Prince Mashele, political analyst, and Joubert, who is an author and a journalist. Till next Monday, ciao ciao.
Finance Minister